I have with me today from Washington, D.C., the president of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, Rob Atkinson. And his organization, along with about 10 other signatories, signed a letter stating their opposition to dealership and local legislatures' efforts to prevent the direct sale of vehicles to consumers. And of course, that obviously affects, most immediately affects Tesla and of course any other companies that might come along. And so I want to learn about this letter. We will, Rob, of course, post a link to the letter so people can actually see the text of it. But just let me, if you don't mind, let me just open by reading a couple of the opening sentences. It says, our individual interest in this group includes such diverse matters as environmental protection, economic freedom, fair competition, consumer protection, and technological innovation. We, however, you say then, and some of us frequently find ourselves on different sides of the political debate. So maybe we, in fact, actually have a model of bipartisanship in a really divided town.
Absolutely.
You see, we find common ground on these issues. In short, basically, we oppose efforts by state legislatures and regulatory commissions to forbid car manufacturers from opening their own stores and service centers. And of course, that's where Tesla comes in. So I am really curious as to what was the origin of this? I mean, what was the catalyst? Who came to you? Did you go to them? How did this come about?
Well, we had ITIF, Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, had written a report that we released in December, just 2 months ago, called the 2014 Luddite Awards.
Okay, yes, I got a copy of that, yeah.
And that of the 10 nominations that we listed, one of them were the states that have banned Tesla direct sales. So one of them was Michigan, right. New Jersey, Texas, and I can't remember the other one.
Carolinas, there's a bunch of them.
Yeah. And we felt that this was basically just pure Ludditism. In other words, an affected interest group that doesn't like technological progress, in this case, new business models, and wanted to use the power of the state to protect their profits at the expense of the rest of us. And that's how we got invited to join on this letter. I should back up and say this is an issue I've been involved in for over a decade. I once, one of my all-time favorite panels was, must have been 10, 12 years ago at the National Conference of State Legislatures annual retreat in San Antonio, where I debated the head of the Texas Car Dealers Association. Whose main claim was, you can trust us more than you can trust GM or Ford.
All right, yes. And if you believe that, I've got a horse over here that's actually a mule I would like to sell you. So,
how much?
Well, that's really interesting. So how did this, I mean, we've got 10 different groups here, and I don't want to go through all of them, but they include a fairly broad group of people on, as you point out, on various ends of the sort of political spectrum. I think some of these groups, I remember reading somewhere, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, that one or more of these groups are sort of supported by the Koch brothers, who don't necessarily have the best reputation within the liberal community. And then you've got at the other end, of course, you have groups like the Sierra Club. So how does one bring a consensus together among those groups?
Well, look, everybody, my belief is everybody in these kinds of organizations fundamentally is about, they're rational people. They don't let their emotions get in the way of what they're trying to accomplish. The Sierra Club has a set of goals. Now, they may not like people, they may have differences of opinion with people, but when it comes time to being able to create a coalition that would help advance the Sierra Club's goals, they will join with almost anybody as long as the person's, ethical and,
right. Sort of the enemy of my enemy is my friend or something.
Absolutely. And in this case, we all aligned around a common enemy, if you will, which is car dealers. And I don't mean to say they're really enemies, but
Right,
they're enemies
right.
of progress. For the case of Sierra Club, they're enemies of progress of clean vehicles. For the case of some of the more conservative groups there, who may be funded by the Koch brothers, they're enemies of consumer choice and consumer freedom.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk just briefly about your group. You know what it does and how long it's been around, so we have sort of a context for what we're talking about here.
Sure. So ITIF, or the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, we're a think tank. We're a little bit unique. We're in Washington. You can see behind me,
Right.
right here on beautiful K Street.
Right.
And our mission really is to help policymakers, not just in the States, but in Washington and around the world, understand why innovation is so important to our future prosperity, our
Right.
future being, and then give them ideas of what they can do, but also at the same time give them our opinion on times when they don't do the right thing. This is a really good example of that. Michigan, in our view, didn't do the right thing. And it's helpful for groups like ours to point that out and to join with other groups to point that out, just so that they know that they don't have impunity when they do these kinds of things.
Right. Well, so let's just for people who may not be familiar with what we're talking about here. In essence, what we have is a company, Tesla, which I don't think you'd have to be living under a rock now not to know about Tesla, given the level of publicity they have generated, and Elon has generated over the last several years. But basically, their business model is to sell directly to consumers, as opposed to the model that I think most of us are familiar with. We can't go down to our neighborhood Ford showroom and negotiate directly with Ford employees and get cars delivered directly from the factory, that kind of thing. Although I would gather that may have been the model very early on, back in, let's say, the 1920s. But of course, that as time evolved, we began to have more and more legislation involved in and a broader market. So in Tesla's case, Tesla sets up these showrooms. They have one or two samples of the car, lots of information, kind of like an Apple store in some respects.
Absolutely.
And then you go in and you use a pad or something and you order the car, or if you can't do it in the showroom, you can go home on your computer, order the car, and they deliver the car to you. That's a really different model than what I think all of us are familiar with, either going to a new car dealer or a used car dealer. There's always sort of that middleman there, and they have argued that that's ineffective on their part. Car dealers, of course, are wary of having to compete side by side or up against a Ford showroom or a Chrysler showroom or whatever, because they figure that's one less layer there. So they have sort of band together in a number of these states to essentially make it difficult, if or not impossible, to actually order one of these cars or buy one of these cars in your state. You got to buy it out of state. So that's kind of the context of what we're talking about, that you're seeking to get that change. How do you think this is something that obviously I'm interested in because of EV World. How do you think this could be resolved? Is this something where it's going to have to be done on a state by state basis? Do you think the federal government and the Supreme Court has to get involved? And what's the thinking of your group, and maybe what you're hearing from other signatures on the letter?
Well, first of all, all 50 states have some kind of ban where the car dealers have gone to their local legislators and, look, there's a car dealership in every state,
Yep.
every state jurisdiction, every state area. They've gone there, they've been able to convince them to put these bans in place. Now, the reason Tesla's been able to get in is because it's a little different in the sense it's a new company. They're no Tesla dealer. So if Ford decided they wanted to do this, there's no way they'll get it. You have to change the laws.
Right.
So Tesla comes in, they get these people to change laws against them. So one of the things, in our view, there's really kind of two main paths here. One is simply to kind of do what we're doing, which is to show There were a number of stories, for example, in the Detroit newspaper and other Michigan newspapers to show that this is something that, frankly, the governor has done, the legislature has done, that's going to hurt Michigan consumers.
Yeah.
And eventually you hope that voters would say, wait a minute, we don't like that. We want to have our own choice. Why are you telling, I can go to an Apple store, as you say, and buy an Apple. I don't have to go to Best Buy. If I want to go to Best Buy, I can. I have choice.
Right.
I might go to Best Buy because I like the other things they have, and I might not. So I think that's one step. Federal action is possible. For example, Mark Cooper and I, Mark is research director of the Consumer Federation of America. We wrote an op-ed in, of all places, the Washington Times.
Oh, okay. Not the Washington Post, but the guys.
Washington Times, very conservative.
Slightly right-leaning.
Yes, slightly right-leaning. But we wrote it when the stimulus package was happening, the American Recovery Act. And what we said is, look, you're going to give all this money to the car industry. They're going to help bail out dealerships.
Yeah.
If you do that, tie it to getting rid of dealer protectionism. And that was the golden opportunity Congress had.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to look that gift horse in the mouth. You can put this provision in there. It's very hard otherwise, I think, because the dealers are so powerful. They give a lot of money to members of Congress. Very hard. So I don't know that the federal government can be able to do that. Court action, I'm not sure. It depends, I think. There was a court case, for example, in Michigan. Michigan seems to love these protectionist things on wine, actually, where they were saying you couldn't buy wine over the internet unless it was a Michigan winery. Now, okay, well, the court struck that down because of violating the Commerce Clause. Right. I don't know that you could go that route with dealerships. So I think a lot of just state by state fighting and getting it done.
Right. Well, the interesting thing is in Detroit's case. I mean, I was there just last month for the auto show, and I got to stay in the Renaissance Center. And my hotel room looked out over the Detroit River, and I could look over into Windsor. And so the way Tesla got around that is they just simply set up a showroom where you can come over, drive under the tunnel, and go over to Windsor a mile away, and drive the car over here, and then we'll deliver it to you from California or wherever they're coming from. So they got around that, but still that is just it seems to me such an inane approach to dealing with this. So, and it seems to me that this has obviously a much larger context. I mean, I've always thought, somebody could fight this on, in fact, the Commerce Clause, and why nobody's done that yet.
It's interesting. Back about 15 years ago or so, I wrote a report at my old think tank called "The Revenge of the Disintermediated." And I looked at cases like this. So you had wine retailers and wholesalers. You had optometrists. You had real estate agents. You actually had car dealers. You had a whole set of middleman interests who, frankly, with the internet economy, you can have business models that bypass them.
Yeah.
None of them were sitting still. They were using their professional powers, their legislative powers, colluding to prevent all this from happening. What was interesting at the time was one of the real leaders on this issue was Ted Cruz, who at the time was the head of the Policy Planning Bureau for the Federal Trade Commission. And so Ted at the time really took a very active interest in this and organized a whole set of hearings and really helped the legislative climate. There was a bill passed, for example, on contact lenses so that you had the right to get your prescription, and if you want to fill it with your optometrist, you can. If you want to fill it with Walmart, you could.
Right. Or
1-800-CONTACTS. So I've been encouraging the FTC ever since. So this is now 14 years of encouragement. Do cars. I said you got to do two industries. You got to do cars and you got to do realtors. Those are the big kahunas. That's where the real money is.
Yeah.
I haven't done it yet. I can imagine you would know why they haven't done it.
Right. Well, exactly. I came to appreciate the economic clout of dealerships. I was at a conference quite a few years ago, staying in a hotel that overlooked the Intercoastal Waterway. And just across the waterway was this enormous, sparkling white yacht. I mean, huge. It wasn't a little thing. This thing had to be a couple 100 feet long. And I learned that that actually yacht belonged to the Southwest Toyota dealership. so, so they were doing okay.